Now, Tulsa itself is also a very significant site because the city was also historically the site of one of the bloodiest outbreaks of racist violence against Black Americans. Now, you have to go back to 1921, and despite segregation, the city's Greenwood neighborhood was one of the largest and wealthiest Black communities in the United States. In fact, it was even known as Black Wall Street. But a false allegation of assault made by a white woman against a Black man ignited a riot, and the community was burned to the ground. In roughly 24 hours, a white mob killed some 300 Black Americans and destroyed property worth about $20 million in today's terms. Well, Damario Solomon-Simmons is a civil rights lawyer representing the last living survivor of the Tulsa Massacre. He joins us right now. Damario, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You know, I have to admit, I just learned about Tulsa a couple of years ago because I was looking for a podcast and this documentary came out. And to hear what happened is just shocking. It is disgusting. But in preparing for my interview, you know, my producer shared with me an earlier interview that you did in which you said that until university, you too were unaware of what happened in Tulsa and the community of Greenwood. What does that tell us about U.S. history?
Well, it tells us that Black history has been eradicated from U.S. history. And as you know, Black history is U.S. history. Black history is world history. And you're correct. You know, I went to high school, I went to middle school on Greenwood Avenue. And so when I got to the University of Oklahoma in 1997, sitting in an African-American studies class, and the professor is talking about this place called Black Wall Street and all of the wonderful things and the businesses and the wealth, I raised my hand up and said, that's not correct. I'm from Greenwood, and I've never heard this story. And of course, I was wrong. And ever since that day, I've made it a mission to learn as much as I can about Greenwood, about how it was built, what actually transpired there, and also the massacre. And so it is an outstanding development that over the last couple of years, more people have known about Greenwood. And so I'm excited that even up there in Canada, you guys have learned about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the more disturbing things that I came across when I was listening to this documentary about Greenwood was this idea that even for decades after the massacre, people could buy postcards of killed African Americans, burn property, and send that out from Tulsa as if it was something to be celebrated.
Absolutely. And this is the thing that we want to make sure people understand through like the new organization that we've just founded, which you can learn more about at greenwoodreparations.com. We want to tell the true story of what happened in the massacre and how the massacre has continued. We believe over the last 99 years, the incidents that you talked about, the postcards, but also the racist policies and practices of the city of Tulsa has kept the Black community in a perpetual state of degradation. And what I mean by that, I mean, in the immediate aftermath of the massacre, laws were passed to prevent the reconstruction of Greenwood homes and businesses. The city of Tulsa allowed the largest KKK facility to be built in the nation right next to Greenwood, which is ironic when we think about what's going on right now in Tulsa with the big white supremacist rally called a Trump rally. And, you know, the city of Tulsa continued to oppress Greenwood by not paving roads, by not providing proper plumbing and piping. So up until the 1950s, there was a significant amount of Black people in Greenwood who did not have indoor plumbing in a modern city like Tulsa. And then in the 60s and the 70s, the city of Tulsa discriminatorily used urban renewal to displace and dispossess thousands of Blacks, those descendants from Greenwood, of the remaining land, and they plowed a highway, Interstate 244, right through the heart of Greenwood, effectively killing any remnants of being able to rebuild from 1921. And this has continued to this day when we see large disparities in policing, health, employment, and wealth accumulation. And all of this relates specifically and directly back to what happened in 1921, because it is the same mind state, the same anti-black white supremacist mind state.
And let's underline the fact again, in 1921, segregation very much alive in the United States, and yet despite those challenges, here you have this thriving African-American community in Greenwood where there was African-American doctors, teachers, lawyers, business owners, very successful business owners, all burned down within a matter of 24 hours, hundreds of people massacred by white supremacists in a matter of 24 hours. And here you are now representing Leslie Benningfield Randall, if I have that correct. And that is the last living survivor of the Tulsa Massacre. What can you tell us about your client?
Absolutely. Well, I want to say she's the last known living survivor that lives in Tulsa. We do know of one other survivor that does not live in Tulsa, but she's the last known living survivor that lives in Tulsa. And this is why I was so excited to come and speak with you today, because one of the aspects of our project at greenwoodreparations.com is to find any other survivors. So we know that people from Greenwood were dispersed as refugees throughout the nation, and some people even maybe went into Canada. So if you're any of the Canadian, if you have a descendant, if you believe you have a descendant, please connect with us at greenwoodreparations.com. But about Mother Randall, she is a magnificent woman, 105 years old. I spoke with her just yesterday, and she told me that, she encouraged me to continue to fight for justice. And she always makes it known to me and anyone that this is not about her. This is about the community that was lost, because even though she's still dealing with the trauma, she would tell you that she still remembers hearing the gunshots and the screams. She can still remember seeing buildings burning, and she remembers running for her life as her grandmother's home was being burnt to the ground. She remembers the smell of ashes and smoke and of burning flesh as she tried to run to safety. She remembers most of all the bodies that she saw stacked up in the streets. And she talks about how the city of Tulsa and those powerful white business and political leaders had a duty to stop what happened, and they did not do it, but they should have done something to help her and her family and her community rebuild, and they have not done anything to this point. And so I'm so excited to represent her and others as we try to move forward and get reparations before the 100-year commemoration. And that's why I asked for any of your audience and goodwill to connect with us at greenwoodreparations.com. Help us find other survivors. Help us amplify this message, because we must have justice for Greenwood.